Why are elites constantly looking for esoteric artifacts? And how does this relate to Hillary Clinton, Gilgamesh, and the invasion of Iraq? All that and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show. I am your host, Jeremy Ryan Slate, the CEO and founder of Command Your Brand. We help our clients to combat cancel culture by placing them on the right podcasts and new media. You can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com. Reminder, if you're brand new to this channel, to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash the subscribe button if you support liberty, freedom, and want to build a better future. And guys, I'm very excited for the conversation we're going to have today because I know for the last year, I've been talking about YouTube shadow bans and how YouTube hates me. And it turns out, I just effed up, guys, and I stopped really giving you what you came to this channel for. And so I reached out to two really fun guys, the hosts of the Nephilim Death Squad, Raven and Top Lobster. So thanks for hanging out with me today, guys.
Thanks for having us, dude. We just wrapped up our episode with you not too long ago. It's been very well received by our audience. And so excited to kind of, what you came on to talk about was the Roman Empire, which is great because we were able to give our audience a lot of really valuable information. Now we've come here to deceive your audience with conspiracy.
The roles.
Roles.
I'm really glad that you've noticed the error of your ways. You're trying to bring people actual information. You're trying to have a well-produced podcast. We're not here for that. This is going to be nonsense. But a lot of it's going to be the truth. But underneath it all, it's going to be a lot of bullshit. So I'm glad that you came to your senses, Ryan. Let's do this.
Well, you should see half the crazy stuff I read, though. So this is kind of more in alignment with how I spend my daily life. I'm reading like History Was Wrong and Book of Enoch and all sorts of fun and interesting stuff. So guys, for people that may not know who you are, first and foremost, tell us a little bit about who you are, man.
So I am Raven, right? I'm one half of Nephilim Death Squad. I also do a show called Timeline Cleanse, and basically Nephilim Death Squad is looking at the conspiratorial world through the biblical lens. I think that Christianity dropped the ball in very many ways over the past few generations. This sort of commercialized, homogenized version of Christianity, and it's been kind of cast to the side. And Top and I came to the table and realized through a lot of other people's work that came before us, Michael Heiser or Gary Wayne, L.A. Marzulli, Tony Merkel, these people showed us that there is a lot of validity in the biblical lens and that we've just been given a sterilized version of Christianity. And so that's been working out very well for us. It turns out that lens is pretty accurate.
Sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say, and how did you two come together?
Complete accident. It was actually, it's unfortunate that it happened, but yeah, I'm Top Lobster. I was in the political realm mainly because of, it was because of Trump and then COVID that got me interested in that kind of thing. So I was very much into libertarian politics, Republican politics, conservative stuff. Started a t-shirt brand, started a company that does graphic designing. That's kind of what I do for a living now. And after a couple of years of really looking into politics, like how you're doing with your show, I realized that it's completely fake, it's completely gay, and there's so much more underneath it. And the underneath is a spiritual aspect. And through that, I met other psychopaths like David, and we were like, hey, you want to start a show? So we did it, and people seem to like it, and it's kind of taken off. So that's where I am. That's how I do this.
And to Top's point, it was actually very interesting the way that we linked up because we were both fans of, and still are fans of the one of the guys that I mentioned before, Tony Merkel of The Confessionals. Tremendous podcast. I recommend everybody check it out. But we were members in the app of his show. And that was how Top first got on my radar. He dropped some pretty interesting information inside that chat. And so, yeah, the entire way that we met each other was based off of this idea of, how would you put this? Spiritual warfare is something that is a constant. And whether or not you believe in it has no bearing on whether or not it affects you. And once we came to that realization, that kind of changed our entire trajectory. So that was like the basis of us getting together.
So what's a Nephilim for people that may not have heard that word before?
So a Nephilim is going to be the offspring of fallen angels that rebelled against God and were cast out of heaven. And these angels landed on Mount Hermon and basically made a pact to subvert humanity for essentially all of time. And one of the things that they did, besides positioning themselves as what we would argue are the pantheons that you see throughout time. I don't think they're allegorical. I think they're actual entities. They just go by different names for different cultures, but they would have intercourse with human women, and their offspring would be described as men of renown. What was the expression, Top?
Oh, the Raphaim.
The Raphaim, and they would have been men of renown, but there was a secondary.
That's interesting because I know like the Greeks would call them demigods, right? Because it's if you look at even somebody like the Greeks call him Heracles, the Romans call him Hercules. He's a demigod, right? He's like not the traditional pantheon, but Zeus comes down to Earth, becomes a busy guy, and he's like, hey, I've got a child support kid,
Yes, and so you'll see this actually emulated through a lot of different pantheons, but this idea of a demigod or an offspring of something angelic or some sort of deity and human women echoes itself throughout all kinds of different mythology. Although, like I said, I'm to the point now where I don't really suspect that it's mythology. I think it's a game of telephone, and the subject matter is an actual entity. And so, that would be it. A Nephilim are the offspring.
Okay. And I guess before we get into it too, I got to say I've been having a lot of fun with your audience on X. By the way, I put up a tweet this morning getting ready for this. Do they still call them tweets? Where the hell they call them posts?
I don't respect that. Yeah, it's tweets.
I put up something this morning that I'm interviewing you guys, and the crowdsourced questions are absolutely useless for this conversation. One person said I'm supposed to ask you guys why you're gay. Another one said I'm supposed to just ask you wildly inappropriate questions and see how you react. And then we have our friend Star Crimes that says, don't ask them anything, explain to them everything. Tell Raven that Africans built Rome.
I recognize all of the names. I saw the tweet this morning. I recognize all of the names that were said. These people are creatures of the night. They're terrible and venomous entities that spend most of their time in our chats.
This is not my audience. So I have a larger following, and somehow now that I've teamed up with David,
you're too good for us?
Yeah, I'm waiting for them. Yeah, it's crazy. This is David's following. So these are unhinged people. They've attached themselves to me. They message me every day. They mean well, but something is severely wrong with them. So if we can ignore them, we could address them. It doesn't really matter to me. Just continue to pay us on PayPal. So nephilimdiscord.com.
So let me ask you this thing, because in preparation for this conversation, like we haven't really talked about anything paranormal or anything related to that. And I asked you guys, like, what should we talk about? And Top's response was just Nephilim shit. Mm-hmm. But then Raven's like, okay, well, I have a deeper idea on this. And he had mentioned something related to Hillary Clinton and Gilgamesh. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? So what is this, and how does this kind of relate to the whole, what we've been talking about here?
So, I mean, Top and I, we talk constantly about there's always this proverbial they that runs things, right?
Okay.
It's like they're in control of this. They're poisoning us. They're making fake clouds. They're, they planned 9, whatever the thing is. And then there's always this question of like, who is they? And some people, the buck will stop at like an ethnicity or a specific group, or you'll get one of your many like brotherhoods. Right, like an Illuminati, an OTO, something of that. The Masons, and it's like, well,
Adam Weishaupt and the Bavarian Illuminati, all that fun stuff.
Exactly, and I think there's a lot of validity to that, but I feel more so inclined to believe that these groups are a vetting process, and at the lowest echelons of this, this fraternity, they don't really know what's going on. They're just regular guys. The Freemasons are just regular guys. One of them's a plumber. One of them's an electrician. They're resource pooling. Hey, if you do my deck, I'll do the wiring for your shit. Things of that nature. But at the upper echelons of these fraternities, I do think that's more of a selection process. So if you've proven yourself out and you've been able to reach, the 33rd degree of Freemasonry or such, you become eligible for something, to be part of something a little bit larger. So when it comes to who the proverbial they is, Top and I have come to the conclusion that there's a spiritual aspect that outranks all flesh. And that spiritual aspect is one that is ancient and adversarial to mankind, whether it is the disembodied spirits of these Nephilim that we mentioned. When they die, their spirits are essentially locked in this realm, but just on the other side of a veil. And this is what you would come to understand as, demons whenever you see people getting possessed or things of that nature. But then there's also much higher ranking entities, where I think is where you get your pantheons from, which are the fallen. And the fallen, like I mentioned at the top of the show, were the ones that were cast out of heaven. But I mean, that's just to kind of lay the groundwork. And then I think what we can do here in this episode is kind of show you the breadcrumb trails that suggest that these elites in different positions, whether they're, presidential candidates or otherwise, are communing with these entities. So Top, I don't know if you want to take it away and kind of start to get into a little bit of the email scandals and things of that nature that kind of allude to some sort of interaction with ancient entities.
Well, I think I appreciate that too, because I really didn't know how to ask you guys that question. The way you kind of laid it out to me right before we started talking here.
Yeah, we're going fast.
So the email stuff is that's a little bit more down the road, but I think it's more interesting to talk about the Genesis 6 part of the Bible, where it's going to mention.
Is that Lot with the? Is that what you're talking about? Or?
No, Genesis 6 is basically that's the fall. It's describing the angels that rebelled. They fell. They took human wives. Some biblical scholars say that it's the sons of Seth, but if you actually look at the Hebrew translation, the sons of God translates to angels. It doesn't translate to sons of Seth. So literally, the sons of God took wives from the daughters of men, and it's describing this unholy union. So back in the day, when a man would court a woman or an entity would court a woman, it would be like a barter exchange from them to the father. Whether it be, I have these goats, let me get your daughter, and then we can form a family and then create a bigger union. Our assumption, and it's also the assumption of Timothy Alberino and a couple of other scholars, is that we were given information. So the book of Enoch talks about the fallen angel Azazel, who gave us information about different types of technology, but one of the main ones is metallurgy, weaponry, makeup. Go figure. So this is eye magic for women, and we're slowly traded this stuff in exchange for their daughters. And what do they want from the daughters? Well, they want to plant their seed and they want to reproduce, because as we study more, especially the book of Revelation, we're doing a huge series with Ed Mabry. We're realizing that these fallen entities, when they're kicked out of God's grace, they understand the plan that's laid out for them. They understand the prophecy, but they don't understand how they're going to get there. So they know that eventually God is going to create a son that's going to redeem all humankind, and then that'll set off the end times for them. That's when they know that they're their time is short. So what do? The first thing that they do is kind of subvert that prophecy, because I'm all over the place, but that prophecy is in the Son. That prophecy is in ancient myths. That prophecy is with Nimrod and his mother, and it's in Hindu lore. I have a bunch of pictures.
Well, even and you guys can correct me on some of this verbiage, because I'm not as well versed on it as you are. I think isn't it even the idea of Enki creating people in a laboratory and that type of thing. And then if you even look at Mesopotamian philosophy, there's the idea of Enkidu, which is a kind of a similar bend on things. Once again, you guys are probably more well versed than I am, but I think it is part of the cultural zeitgeist in a lot of other areas too.
Yeah, so people they'll point to these things and be like, you see, Jesus Christ is just a mimicry of these older traditions that were told in ancient Babylon and even before. And my contention is no, that it's not. It's these fallen entities are aware of the prophecy. They recreate it the same way they'll do with a New Age philosophy that you'll hear, a Christ consciousness, where it's kind of Christianity, kind of Jesus Christ, but not quite. There's always a one important lie and inversion there that leads you away from the truth, which is, it's actually interesting. The inversion there is pretty obvious. It's you'll be like a god. We have God in us, right? That's the original lie. That's what got Adam and Eve kicked out of the garden. So right there, if we can diagnose that issue, we know that that's nonsense. and to discard it. And that original lie is in each one of these mythologies that tells the story of Jesus, but it's never Jesus. It's like, so you have Semiramis, who now is, that name is mimicked where you'll see Mother Mary. Semiramis is, she's impregnated by her son Nimrod after he died. And she says that it's a miracle. First off, she married her son and had babies from him, but then she gave birth to, I forget the name of the baby. And this also mimics the story of Jesus Christ. So these fallen entities have been telling this same story over and over and over again. And they're also kind of doing this, how would you call it? It's like a miraculous birth of Jesus Christ, where it's like a spiritual entity that goes into human woman and then comes forth a savior. They do this, but they create abominations, and the abominations are the Nephilim. I
think the thing that's interesting too is I think it's even a little bit, I know this is a little bit ridiculous, but it's also in the cultural zeitgeist too, because if you even look at like let's say just Star Wars, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Like, where the heck did Anakin Skywalker come from, right? Like it's something that's also seeped into the cultural zeitgeist in a lot of ways too, but do continue.
It's the same story told over and over. It's one of the greatest stories, but it's told over and over and over again. But Ed Mabry says, and it's actually a great way to look at it. It's like, instead of looking at the ways that we're similar, like he said, we can all look at each other and describe how we're similar. We have 5 fingers, we have 2 arms. And if I describe those like menial things to you, you'd be like, oh, same dude. But if I'm like, no, Ryan has a porn mustache, you'd be like, okay, now we're getting more specific. I'm sorry.
I think it's a great mustache. But here's the problem is, my wife calls it a Viking beard because my hair is black, but my mustache comes in red. So I think it wouldn't look as bad if it was actually the same color as my hair. Anyway.
You inspired me, though. I went solo mustache now. I trimmed everything else down and brought this
There we
out.
go, man.
You're ruining my show. The aesthetics. No, it's fine. I like the stash. What I'm saying is that when we, like, if you look at the similarities of the stories, it's like, yeah, a lot of this stuff is the same. But the big differences are none of them were reborn. Like, none of them died, came back to life, and none of them came to die for your sins. And that's the main story of what God is doing with Jesus Christ. We're obviously Christians here, so this is what we base it all on a biblical framework. And that's the major inversion. That goes all the way back to Genesis 6. And David, if you want to take it from here, we can move on with some more like either etymology or like the story of how this is going on.
Well, so I want to eventually work my way up to building a case for these things still being the ones that are in charge, and that the elites, the proverbial they, are communing with them. But before we do, Top kind of started to pick at something that I think is integral to this entire discussion, which is, it does seem that he was talking about the exchange and the exchange of information. In other words, you give me your daughter, I'll give you information, technology. It seems that, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, Ryan, in your studies of Rome, a lot.
Should we call you Ryan or Jeremy Ryan? You got three
you
names.
just call me Jeremy, man. Like, okay, so the
Jeremy's
only reason
better.
I do that is because my parents named me after a cowboy actor, and like I could not get found in Google for like my first 3 years online. So now, like in year 9 or 10 here, we just use my full name. It's the only time I used to hear is when I was in trouble. Jeremy Ryan Slate. So it's like, kind of like I'm taking it back. I guess that's what we're doing here.
Okay, that's fine. I respect it then. So we're going to call you
Jeremy.
J-Dog.
That's fine.
Okay.
J-Dog.
So what ends up happening, it seems, throughout history is these entities are responsible for giving foundational technologies, let's say, understanding of agriculture, or like Top said before, metallurgy, which is a big one, right? There's always an advancement. Music, right. There's always an advancement of some sort, but in ancient times, it was attributed to some sort of entity. We suspect that what's actually been happening is these entities, they can't create anything, but they can influence us from whatever realm they're in. And we have to consent to that influence. We have to say, yes, it's like...
Well, let's go back for a second. How did they get to this realm, into this strange ether that they're in? Well, in the book of Genesis, when we're talking about the flood and Noah, this is how they got there. So people like L.A. Marzulli and Timothy Alberino, guy who wrote Genesis 6.
Noah is the same as like Upnapishtim. Is that who he's also related to?
Yes.
It's I'm trying to pull a lot of this stuff from memory. As I said, I'm not as well versed as you guys are.
Yeah, but this is the same story. Every ancient civilization has a flood myth, right?
Yeah.
And whatever. These guys think that the flood happened because God was like, hey, listen, things are out of control and we have to reset it. So if you read the Bible, most of the time, if you go to church, they'll say, well, man was wicked. And that's why God had to reset the world. But they're like, I don't think it was just man. Man was wicked. They were taking part of this. What happened here is that the world was completely controlled by the Nephilim kings, which is, they speak about it in the book of Enoch. These giant kings are ruling different municipalities. And I mean, you can go to different places, even in Tennessee, even in America, there are ancient mounds. There's evidence of giants. If you look at the Alaskan boneyard, dude, that's, in my opinion, is evidence of giants, giant bones.
Well, even the medieval Britons, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. They refer to giants that walked across during the time of the Romans in kind of like Britain in that area. There's a whole mess of lore around that.
It seems like every ancient civilization has some sort of giant lore. And just to piggyback off what you're saying, Top, the Inca. So there's an official descriptive given by the Peruvian government as to how the megalithic structures came about, but there are still people that are descendants from, claim to be descendants from the Inca, that their lore is entirely different. They say that a race of giants built the megalithic structures that you see in Peru, and that that race of giants became cannibalistic, were eating man and warring with one another, and their like overarching head god sent floodwaters to kill them. So this is something you'll find everywhere.
Yeah, same story every time. And there is still leftover, in my opinion. There might be some leftover giants, but they're much smaller now. Like we've had in 2012, I think the Kandahar giant, that experience of American military in Afghanistan. They ran into one of these guys, killed a couple of them. They killed him. They helicoptered the body away. There are still stories that kind of echo today. But back then, I think most of them were killed by this flood. And this was a worldwide flood, a calamity. So these larger Nephilim, the ones that would require human sacrifice, which is where we get the idea of human sacrifice, where we have to offer up our child or who knows, the weakest member of our tribe to this Nephilim king, and they'll just eat them. This is constant. You'll hear this in every society throughout time. So
we'll even look at Goliath as well, right? Like with that's kind of another interesting one too. You could tie into that.
And he was a smaller Nephilim. I think he was I forget the classification, because as you go from Nephilim to Raphaim to Gibberim, and it goes down, and each generation gets smaller. The elongated head kind of shrinks a little bit. Maybe the sixth finger goes away. So yeah, these guys had 6 fingers, 2 rows of teeth. Some of them say that they had red hair, pale skin, and ranging from, I don't know, like 40 feet tall to some of the smaller ones would be like 9 to 12 feet tall. So you're talking about Nimrod size, or Goliath was about 9 feet, which is still huge. Anyway, the larger ones are eliminated from the earth, and their spirits have nowhere to go. So they go into this other dimension, this other realm, which now we can get into the idea of Stranger Things and pop culture.
Where you have like the upside down, that type of thing?
Yeah. This is actually well reported on, and you don't really see this in many places, but people have experience after experience, near-death experience. People can really tell you about this in detail. People who do, what's that called with the silver cord, David?
Astral projection.
Astral projection. They can tell you about experiencing this upside down world or going into this other dimension. But even more popular, you can go and talk to somebody like Joe Rogan, who's like kind of influencing this into the zeitgeist with DMT, with float. Where have we seen a float tank before in a TV show?
We haven't.
Stranger Things.
No, we have. Stranger Things. They put 11.
Because the only time I was ever familiar with a float tank, so one of my this is going way back. One of my favorite bands is a band called From Autumn to Ashes, and the lead singer actually used to write songs in a float tank. That's the only reason I'm familiar with like what a float tank was before I saw it.
Shit, dog.
That's 100%. Yeah, that's like when you hear people say, "Well, where did that idea come from? It came from the muses. I pulled it from the ether. It came to me in a dream." Like that's because a lot of our ideas are coming from not ourselves. We're not generating the ideas. They're moving across our field of awareness. And I think, things like drug use and certainly deprivation tanks can really thin the veil between you and these ideas, wherever they're coming from.
It seems nefarious too when you have like the largest podcaster in the world, and I like Joe, but he's a proponent of DMT, which will send you into another realm for a couple of minutes, where he says that he's talking to machine elves and other kind of Joker creatures on the other side, and they're telling him this and that. And then he's also pushing, mushrooms is also another great way to thin the veil. I don't know which dimension it'll bring you to, but ayahuasca trips he talks about. And then these sensory deprivation tanks, like the float tanks. You go into these things and you can contact other entities. I don't know if people are generally aware of it, but if you are aware of it, you can go there willingly and look for this stuff. Like one of my friends she went on an ayahuasca trip and she was like, it was great. The grass was talking. The guy that I was with, his experience was cool. He said he saw the jaguar woman again. And I'm like, wait, let's stop right there. What do you mean he saw a jaguar? It was just a woman with the jaguar head. And he's seen her like a couple of different times. Well, they're localities. So she went to, I think, somewhere in South America, and they go to the same place. And when they do these ayahuasca trips, they're peeling back the veil, and you're seeing the same entities because these same entities kind of live there. This is why you've got like Quetzalcoatl from Mexico, and you have different entities in China, different entities in India. They all present differently. They're all localities. None are omnipresent. So we're playing with dangerous stuff here. And I feel like I'm flying off the rails here, but we're playing with some.
No, it's interesting. And I guess something I don't talk a lot about in this show, actually never talk about on this show. First of all, if you guys ever get a chance to look into the deified Romulus, he becomes a similar character to what you're talking about. I mean, Romulus, like Rome's founder. So if you guys ever get a chance to dive into that, it's some interesting stuff. But when I was 19, we were playing a pickup football game, and we were way too aggressive with it, like tackling each other without pads and kind of just beating the hell out of each other. I just destroyed my knee. I tore 3 major ligaments, and I was supposed to. I had a knee surgery to kind of fix this whole situation. And I found out much later I probably could have sued them for malpractice. But anyway, I had a problem where my lung collapsed and my oxygen levels were dropping and everything. So they actually brought in a priest to give me last rites. And I had this really weird out of body experience where like the walls were talking to me and stuff like this. So like kind of what you're talking about here, like I've experienced it. So it's kind of like, I don't think it's BS, I guess we could say.
Yeah. We were just talking, we talk about it a lot, right? It was like Tucker Carlson's recently on stage with somebody, and he's saying that he thinks that spirituality has been purposefully removed from the West, like our understanding of the spiritual realm. And I think like, yes, 100%. And I also think that that's incredibly dangerous, not just because you don't understand now that there is a huge component to this existence that is inherently spiritual, but like you're going to interact with it from time to time. And you need to go into these interactions with a foundation in something.
More of like, I'm trying to think like more based on idols than based on like practice, if that makes sense. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Well, this is the layer of this sort of pseudo spiritual government now where everyone's worshiping something. You're worshiping money, but behind money is represented by a certain lowercase g god. Behind abortion, that's Moloch behind that. So, whether these people like it or not, the people who are taking part in this practice, or the people who are encouraging it, they are worshiping a Moloch. And then there's the people on top who know exactly who it is by name. And they're the ones who are influencing the politics and the culture to then worship these gods, because it has to be behind, it always has to be hidden. They cannot come out, or when maybe they can. And that's like what the book of Revelation talks about. Like in the end, when these things are just right in your face, like, hey, this is what you've been worshiping the whole time. This is me, bow down and worship. And this is kind of what they want. They either want fear or worship. But David, go ahead, man, because I feel like I'm going to ramble and just scramble through this whole thing.
I mean,
I apologize too, because I feel like I'm scattering you guys with all the questions, but like I'm super intrigued with what you guys are talking about. We have to
lay this foundation to get to this bigger thing, because it's hard to tell people like, hey, the elites are worshiping entities that have been here since the dawn of time.
Yeah, they're like, tell us about Nephilim shit. I was like, I got to tell you about all this other stuff first.
Yeah. And it's important, though. It is important because
it's like me spending a half an hour trying to explain Julius Caesar to somebody, because it's like you need to have all this ground knowledge before we can even get to there.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes. So, I mean, I think now when you bring it into modern times, when I was younger, when I was a young conspiracy theorist, I was probably like 16, 17 years old and was pretty comfortable with the idea that there was like spooky entities around. You know, I had some family members who had weird experiences. I had weird experiences. And when you start to look into those things, you eventually find all the symbolism that's attached to all these entities, right? Or allegedly what they are, what the internet's claiming that they are. At least that's how it was for me in 2006. And I think what ends up happening, or what ended up happening to me, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is like you see these pentagrams, you see these all-seeing eyes, you see the owl of Minerva, you see an endless plethora of esoteric symbolism that you don't understand, but it seems to be, if you're paying attention, in everything. Yes. You know, particularly music videos, particularly Hollywood. That is where these things are on high display.
Look at the logo for CERN. This is a very obvious one. Everybody knows this is 666.
It's literally just six. Yeah, it's 666. It's insane.
You're talking about CERN. You guys are going to get Shane Cashman all excited.
Yeah. Shane Cashman right now somewhere. He's looking around.
Oh wow, that's wild. Look at that. It's like six is intertwined.
Yeah, they don't care anymore. It's right in your face.
Oh wow, that's weird.
That's an obvious one, right? Like, but in years prior, it's been a lot more hidden. Like they have to like keep the hidden hand. This is why I think people are perceptive to our show and what we're talking about now, because the Nephilim shit is right out there in the open for you now.
Okay.
Yes.
They're barely hiding. I mean, if you look at the Olympics, you look at pop culture, I think that's where you were going, Hollywood, music.
Yes.
It's Post Malone is worshiping the devil outright. It's strange time.
Well, I mean, look at everything that
even who's that other guy? The hip hop guy. Oh, what the hell?
Lil Nas X.
That one, yes.
That's exactly where I was going.
Strange, man.
Yes. Yeah. Doja Cat does the same thing, right? She's recently taking. It was strange. Right when the guy from Friends died, she took a picture, put it on her TikTok. It was the only content on her TikTok. It's her on the Friends couch with the Friends logo floating in the air above her, except it says demons instead of friends, and she's done up like a black demon. They're always doing this, and people used to think it was like a cheeky element, something to fly in the face of like a mostly Christian nation. You know, we were kind of shaking off the shackles of all this like rigid conservatism, and
but now look, is this a mostly Christian nation to you?
Right. So now what is it?
I would say not anymore. Like we've lost our religion in a lot of ways.
But we're still doing it. We're still putting this demonic stuff on the screen. And it no longer has the shock value that it used to have. That used to be the veil that they would go under. Well, it's shock value. You know, we haven't seen this sort of thing yet. Okay, well, we've seen it. We've seen it for the past like 40 years now. Can we move on? No, actually, we're going to stay here. We're going to keep doing it. We're going to double down.
We're going to open up portals.
Exactly. So, once you start to find all these symbols and everything, if you are interested, you're going to start looking, well, what do they mean and who are they associated with? And you find all these entities that they're associated with. And you find out, at the very least, what I think a lot of people can get comfortable with. If you can't get comfortable with the idea that there are, in fact, entities, you certainly can get comfortable with the fact that the proverbial elites believe in something that you might not believe in, right? People are willing to say that. It's like, it doesn't matter if you believe it, they believe it.
Let's even look at, what was it, the Iowa, where they had they brought in that statue at the state capitol, which was really strange. I think around Christmas time.
Yeah, they're doing that a lot now.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. And what do we just do? We just had the RNC, where all of a sudden they're doing some sort of Hindu god veneration, and they're doing like a Hindu prayer on stage at the RNC to an entity that, you know, if you ask Nephilim Death Squad, we believe that entity's real, but we believe specifically that it was either a fallen angel or one of its offspring.
Yeah, it's a lowercase g God. The Bible goes out of the way. I mean, the first commandment, thou shalt take no gods before me. Why is that the first commandment? Because it's important and because it's legitimate. There are gods, small g gods, and they can do things. And he's telling you, do not worship them. They want your worship, but they're going to lead you astray. The first commandment. And still, like, we don't care.
That's really interesting, too, because I think what we're told, like, once again, I grew up all through Catholic grammar school, high school, college, all that kind of stuff. I think we're told, like, there are no other beings. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, we're told they're kind of like Highlander. There is only one. And
that's a big misstep. That's a big ball drop on behalf of the Catholic and Christian church, because it's like, there is one God that created everything. There is one God who, you know, sent his only begotten son to die for our sins. There's one God that is the central orchestrator of this entire existence. However, he gives us free will, and he did create, you know, lesser entities than himself that a third of them chose to rebel against him. And so it becomes much more palatable if you say there are no other gods, but there are angels who went astray, let's say. But throughout history, we've called them gods. They give us different technology. We give them women. They give us secrets and information. They give us hermetic teachings. They give us, all these different things. And we give them veneration. We give them sacrifice. We give them worship. And I mean, that's been the story since the dawn of man. We've been, in bed with these entities.
It's also very important. Like, I don't know how much of your audience is going through this, but we've spoken to a number of different people who have been in contact with these sort of entities, and they don't know where to put them. And this was early in the show when we were talking with them. We're like, well, we're trying to get descriptions of what they're telling them to do, what these guys are all about. But actually in the Bible, it says that you can test the spirits, and it encourages you to do that because these are fallen angels or the offspring of fallen angels. So they can come and represent themselves to you like a regular angel, and you wouldn't know. But you can ask them outright, like, hey, where are you coming from? Do you, is Jesus your king? Like, just test them, and they have to answer you. Are you for or
against me?
Yeah, there's hermetic principles and spiritual rules that they must abide by. And one of those rules, I mean, we're going all over the place again, but one of the rules is consent. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
Always have to let the vampire in.
Yes, that's great, right? The vampire lore, it's like it can't cross the threshold. You have to invite it in. A lot of these things are based off of consent. And I think that, in the West, we have to reframe our understanding of what consent means. You think consent means like sign your name on a dotted line, the Faustian bargain kind of a deal. It's like, that's a reductive version of what consent is. Consent, if you're taking a drug like dimethyltryptamine, you're consenting to, you've willingly, upon your own accord, taken this, ingested it, and willingly dissolve the veil between yourself and this other realm. These things now have, permission, essentially, to communicate with you. It's the same thing as like
it's even like taking your thoughts in a certain direction, right? Like if you're taking your thoughts in a certain direction and exploring something, well, you're consenting to it, right? Otherwise, you would avoid the thing.
Exactly. So our idea of consent in the West has been bastardized. It's like, no, you consent to a lot of things on a regular basis that if you were to have your feet held to the fire about the things that you've said yes to in so many ways, you'd feel ashamed. And so
it's terrible. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's something to be conscious of. So Jeremy, you as somebody who lifted weights throughout your life, every time you decided to have just like plain chicken and rice in order to, build muscle and stay on your diet, you're consenting one way or another. So you've consented to do one thing. If you decided to go to Burger King, you've consented. It's that small. It's every drop of sand in your life. Every decision that you make is a consent to do this or that.
Yeah, I will say like part of that is I did bring a cooler every single place I went with me. And every girlfriend I ever had hated it. My wife was like, I'll carry your cooler. I'm like, we're getting married. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she's the one.
She's the one. But that is it. It's like every little decision. And that really goes to, it flies in the face of especially what we're being taught in the West right now, culturally speaking. It's like, live for the moment. It is what it is, have fun. And it's like, well, maybe the stakes in this realm should be regarded as being much higher. But instead, it's like, no, there's this notion that you should move through life flippantly. But one of the things that I wanted to start to pull this in the direction of is to kind of show you that these concepts are very much still alive and well. And I think one of the greatest examples, and it's going to get into really weird waters because all of this ties together with Jeffrey Epstein and John Podesta and Hillary Clinton and everything. But what was it? 2018, 2019 is when the Anthony Weiner laptop would have been confiscated and I don't know if it was, that was Biden's laptop that was found at that repair shop, Hunter Biden's laptop. But when it comes to the Anthony Weiner laptop, there was a lot of correspondence on that laptop between people like Hillary Clinton or John Podesta. And some of the more interesting discussions found on there that I think will open this conversation up were things like asking about the location of the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, as well as the location of the buried Nephilim. So that right there is a very interesting, and I actually learned recently that wasn't specifically from Hillary Clinton. This is like someone on her team that's looking for this.
But they're looking for it specifically that the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, which is also that could be related back to Nimrod, and the bodies of the buried Nephilim.
Right.
Well, and if you look at it historically, like I think there have been people typically they're always looking for these things. Like, have you ever read? There's a guy Otto Rahn who wrote a book, Crusade Against the Grail, where actually he was looking for like the Holy Grail and a lot of these different things. Like the Nazis were actually paying for it. Yeah, and there's actually an entire book you can read on it. So it's not, I guess, not strange that people have been kind of diving into these things politically throughout history.
I think the entire, 9/11 was yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Well, so this will be released in a week, but 9/11 was yesterday. We're breaking the third wall. And that was used as a pretense to go into Iraq. Yeah. Although, I mean, it was Saudi terrorists that got on a plane, knocked down the Twin Towers.
Yeah,
and
that's one of
Iraq.
those things too. Like at the time, I'm like, I'm trying to remember how old I was at the time. I'm like 19. I'm like, yeah, let's blow it up. And now I think I'm like, whoa, what have we done? Like, you know what I mean? Because you kind of look at life a lot differently the more of this stuff you pick up.
Well, so I was a big libertarian, so I'm a fan of Scott Horton, and I've read all of his books, and I understand the war in the Middle East, and I don't understand it as as well as he does, but I do understand that there's a long history. It's not, I mean, it goes even before George Bush Sr. and the CIA. We've trained these people to do this stuff. But when we go into Iraq, it's not because we want to bring them democracy, and it's not because we want to get them back for what they did in 9/11, which they had nothing to do with. These were Saudi nationals. It's, I believe, we were there looking for artifacts. Because the first thing we did was raid the museums.
Battery.
Yes. Took all their stuff. There's also mention of a Stargate. There's some weird esoteric stuff that was happening in Iraq, which could possibly also be the location of ancient Babylon. So, our elites disguise a lot of these things as fiscal policy, foreign policy, different things like that. It's about oil. It's not about oil. We have oil here. If we wanted to get oil, we could just go to Pennsylvania and start fracking. It's about some weird esoteric stuff going on, and they're not telling us about this. So those emails bring that to light.
So we're talking about how even a moment ago you said it, Jeremy. It's like they're looking for the Holy Grail. Hitler was looking for the Spear of Destiny. Hitler is doing speeches from the altar at the altar at Pergamum. Yeah, Donald Trump has an Ark of the Covenant. It's like, for what reason?
Mar-a-Lago.
What's fascinating about this is people go, yeah. They've always had an interest in these ancient artifacts anyway, and then we move on as if to say
they were at a huge dinner. Like Tim Pool's there with the suit on and a beanie, and they walk past the Ark of the Covenant and go, pretty cool. Anyway, look at this pool. Look at the golf course.
It's just a novelty. It's just a silly thing.
He's got the Ark of the Covenant there, and nobody's like, well, why?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing is we're so as a society, we're very dismissive of it. Yes, we're willing to accept that they're looking for these artifacts. No, we don't think that there's any validity to it. And it's like, why would the people that get to the most influential positions on the planet decide that this is what they need to be focusing on? There's all these things that come across their desk, all these things that demand their attention. It's an exhausting position to be in as a world leader. But for some reason, you're finding time to dedicate resources to look up esoteric ancient artifacts that have no real significance and have no power at all. I don't believe that for a second. I believe that every single time somebody gets to an elevated position of power, they realize that there's power in these artifacts. And so when you're talking about, you can say, well, the Hillary Clinton emails, this is some sort of code. Dude, I'm begging you. What code are you thinking up that has to do with expressions like it's time to sacrifice another chicken to Moloch? Or I need to find the location of the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, who historically seems to have been the same character as Nimrod, which was the king of Babel, and the location of the buried Nephilim. What code is that this woman is speaking?
I'm going to swing
this even you want to go further back than that. There's also the weird stuff of, I think it's Henry II of England claims that they find the body of King Arthur. This stuff is throughout history. They've been claiming that they're finding these different things. And I guess for what purpose, like you're saying?
I'm going to go ahead and swing this even crazier. So if you're looking for these ancient artifacts, and specifically the bodies of the buried Nephilim or the bones of the Nephilim, why would you be looking for the bodies or the bones? What are you going to do?
That would be my
with them?
question. What would you believe that you would do with them, or they can do for you? Like,
Well,
let's get really
I know where
weird.
Top is going with this, but I just want to lay a quick foundation. Isn't it interesting that so many of the most admired ancient civilizations practice really strenuous, what would be the expression, preservation methods of bodies?
Yeah.
They went through really straight, especially the Egyptians. I think they are the most shining example of the lengths to which they went to preserve these bodies.
And here's a weird tie-in for that. So, like, you have somebody like Alexander the Great, the Greeks, and also the Macedonians, who he is at that time. They would have burned bodies; they wouldn't have saved them. But then Alexander conquers Babylon and conquers Egypt, all these different territories. He's mummified at the end of his life, which is totally culturally incorrect for him, which is why would he do that?
He learned something.
The same reason that when these elites discover something, they start chasing ancient artifacts, you know. But go ahead, Top, take it away.
Yeah, he definitely saw something in their culture and was convinced of it. So yeah, the question is, why would they want to preserve these bodies? Why would they look for these artifacts? But the bodies more specifically. Let's fast forward. Let's get a little bit political today. One of the things that Trump said that he wants to do, which I was like, this sounds pretty good because we have birth rates that are pretty low in the United States. White people just aren't having sex anymore for whatever reason. And
hey, I got 3 kids, man. We're doing a great job over here.
Me too. I'm trying to clap those cheeks. I encourage everybody to go ahead and do that. But no, well, what he's doing is introducing free IVF for the general population. I guess it'll be covered by some kind of medical plan. And on its face, I'm like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. A lot of Christian conservatives have like a knee-jerk reaction against it because they're like, it's not the natural way to do things. And I'm like, yeah, I get that too. I understand that as well. But then it gets into this territory of, okay, look into the process. You get sperm from the male, you get the eggs from the woman. And most of the time, the women are going to give you like, I don't know, something like 20 eggs you can retrieve from them. And then you inseminate those eggs. That's 20, let's say like 10 to 20 fertilized eggs. Let's say 7 of those get past the embryo phase. I forget, there's like a 5th phase. I was reading about it where blastocyst occurs and it's able to separate enough for it to be a viable source. Then they rate them. There's like AA to F. Some they'll discard, but then from, I believe, C to AA they'll keep. How many children are going to be implanted into this woman throughout her lifetime with this IVF process?
Wait, 1.
Maybe 1. Sometimes they'll do twins. Maybe they'll do 2 or 3 kids, right? 5. Let's say you did 6 kids and you have another 7 embryos. Those now belong to the state. They cost about, on average, I'm assuming. I'm going to assume because what the state does all the time is like, you don't really own anything. If they're paying for it, that's their shit. But if you're doing this in a private process, it's going to cost you over $1,000 a year to keep these eggs cryogenically frozen. How long are you going to keep them for? I don't know. You could discard them. Yeah. Before, how long do you want to pay $1,000 a year before you're like, well, what the fuck am I doing with these eggs?
Sure.
And you either throw them out, you donate them or whatever. I don't know. What is the state going to do with these eggs? So now, like, that's kind of nefarious there when you start to think about that. Then you take a little bit of a wider look and a step back and you get into real crazy stuff. Right now, we're on, like a couple months ago, actually, we were on the brink of disclosure about aliens, right? There's all of a sudden there's aliens. The Mexican government is wheeling out aliens that are mummified and then they cut into them. They look like cake. It's all kinds of crazy shit. There's UFOs everywhere. Tucker Carlson is telling you outright, basically, that these things do exist. He's also saying that they're interdimensional. You asked on Twitter, you were like, I want to know, like, how crazy is the universe? Well, I don't know how big the universe is. I don't think we can get off of this planet. I think that we're kind of stuck here. I think there's a firmament. I don't think we can get off it, but I do think that there's interdimensionality. That's a whole different side of it. He's about to like lose his shit on me.
But me or him?
Both of you. I don't know. Whatever.
No, because like the thing I'm running through my head right now, and I've read so much shit, so I'm trying to remember where I read it from. The one alien myth of them inseminating women by creation in a lab, it's like kind of very similar to a process like that. I just think it's interesting. You're talking about kind of the reveal thing.
Yeah, this is what he's getting to is the genetics of all of this, right? Because it was like, well, why are they worried about preserving the bodies, and why are they looking for the bodies? You know, and it's because I think that the expression "there's nothing new under the sun." I think there was a time when, and a lot of people will argue this.
So, do you think that are you guys making a case for maybe they're not using the father's sperm or something like that? Is that what you're trying to say here? Because I know even there was a doctor in, I'm trying to remember which state this was, where he got in trouble because basically he was getting rid of all the male sperm and just putting in his own. So then it turned out he had like 30 kids.
That's a huge possibility when you open up. So that this is just like, that's a side note.
Okay.
And it's something brand new that I've been kind of mulling over in my head. I haven't even really brought up to David, but yeah, when you're doing IVF in mass and the state is paying for it, there could be a lot of confusion. There could be a lot of lost eggs. It's some
remember
weird
that case
stuff
of
going on.
the nurse saying on her deathbed that she swapped over 2,000 babies. It's like, if you could do that. Yeah, dude, what a nightmare. What a horrifying nightmare that she swapped. If you could do that, I just imagine, like, what could you do when you don't even have to worry about an actual baby?
Well,
if
even
you
just through stupidity.
Something.
Like, even just
that
through
too.
stupidity. Like,
Neglect.
somebody just labeling something wrong.
Yeah,
You
it's
know
like,
what I mean?
why are we letting... I don't know if it's a good idea to be letting the government do this, because they do such a shining job in all other endeavors. It's like, yeah, let's trust them with this. But when it comes to the whole, like, why are they looking for these bodies? I think it's for genetic material. And you're touching on something with the UFO abductions and the impregnating of women. This is something that you'll see very often, where it's like
story, right?
It's the same story. It's the manipulation of our genetics, and that's been the name of the game since, you know, the dawn of time. It's what the flood was about, was to try to balance this out, because there was a time when, you know, Nephilim DNA or fallen DNA was so intermingled with mankind that very few, it's like when they talk about Noah being perfect, I believe the actual expression was he's perfect in his generations, which to me sounds a lot more like genealogy, like the idea that Noah had still human DNA, and he was among the very few at that time who did, because the seed of man had intermingled so much with the seed of the sons of God that, you know, our DNA was all messed up. There's also a lot of other stuff.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
The Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
You can support the Wellness Company by heading over to twc.health/JRS. That is twc.health/JRS. Get up to 15% off select products. Support the Wellness Company and help support this show. Thanks again.
Well, there's even so do you guys remember the Cathars in southern France? And the Albigensian Crusade, I think it's in I don't remember exactly what year it is, but it's around like the year 1200 or 1300 or something. It's where the Pope goes in, he basically kills like a million people in southern France. But the Cathars had this interesting thing. There would be a group of celibate people among them that were called the Perfecti. And these were basically ones that, you know, weren't procreating with others, which I think is kind of interesting because it connects to a little bit of this stuff.
Yeah. So this goes back to the Bible. So in Genesis 3:15, he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring, and hers will crush your head, hers will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. So this is a prophecy that's talking about the seed war. This is between Nephilim DNA and human DNA. So there's a huge battle going on, and it's me and David's contention that this battle is not just between not just between human beings and men, but it's a very spiritual one. So when we get into the alien stuff, where they're abducting people and they're using cow wombs, cow innards, they're using cow blood, they're taking semen from men, they're doing also some weird anal stuff. L.A. Marzulli will say that he thinks it's a genetic breeding program, and it's the same plan that's been going on since the beginning, but it's a little bit more technological. It's not as physical anymore because for some reason they are not presenting themselves as physical, but more spiritual. If that makes any sense to you.
So I guess what's the end game of all this then? Like where is it going, or what's kind of the purpose of it? Because I guess I can Like I could accept maybe a lot of these things we're doing, whether it's the invasion of Iraq or something, or maybe for different ideas than what we're doing them, and maybe this dissemination thing is true. But I guess what's the purpose of it then? Like why would we be doing it?
So we have explored that topic pretty extensively on Nephilim Death Squad, but one of the things that we came about recently, thanks to the help of Ed Mabry on our continuing the Book of Revelation series that we do on Friday.
Those are really good, by the way. I just got into that recently.
He's awesome. I can't believe he keeps agreeing to come on the show. So one of the things that he said was yeah, exactly. One of the things that he said that really felt like a piece of the puzzle just clicked together for us was this idea that they are trying to. So Nimrod was the king of Babel, and from Babel, all of these empires sprung forth. It's like Babel was the first, so Nimrod was the first, and all other things spread or spring forth from Babel, historically speaking, until modern times. And it brings into question when you hear about let's say when you hear about the Antichrist, it's like, who is the Antichrist going to be? And we do a lot of speculation on that. I don't think that we've really hit the nail on the head in any meaningful way. We have dug up some interesting coincidences having to do with certain world leaders like Donald Trump and things of that nature. Although we don't believe he's the Antichrist, he certainly does display a lot of uncanny coincidences.
Well, didn't Nostradamus say the guy was going to come like from with a blue turban or something like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different when it comes to we focus more on the biblical thing because when it comes to the various psychic prophet characters throughout history, there's always something weird with them. I don't think there's a lot of validity and interesting things in what he had to say, but not somebody that we spend a lot of time talking about. But
we should look into it. That could be a fun
honestly
episode.
We should. Oh, there's another one too. I forgot what her name is. As a little old woman, I think she might have been blind, and she was like a pretty kick-ass psychic and got a lot of stuff right. I forget what her name is though, but I'd like to do a deep dive on her. But when it comes to who is the Antichrist going to be, Ed Mabry believes that it's not going to be necessarily a man. At one point it will be a man who will sustain a head wound and he will actually die. And since, these entities, they can't really create, they can only counterfeit what God has already done or invert what God has already done, which is why we see so many counterfeit coming of the Messiah type of situations. When it comes to the birth of Jesus or the Immaculate Conception, there was a lot of counterfeits before he was born. We were talking about that earlier in the show. Well, there's a lot of counterfeits when it comes to, even
the story in the Roman poet Virgil, he talks about like a coming of someone. They try to tie it to the first emperor Augustus, which is actually... It's like a 30-year difference between him and Christ, so it's not that much different in terms of like the grand scheme of the time periods.
Well, I think there's been plenty of Antichrists. Like the Antichrist, there's an end all character that will appear, but like there are people whose spirit has been that of Antichrist, and you see them come a lot throughout history. People would argue that Hitler was one of them,
but they also have to be there because again the fallen understand the prophecy, but nobody knows the time and place.
Right.
So it's almost like they're always working to fulfill it. They always have to have somebody in place because like, is this the guy? Is this the time?
Yeah.
We think it's the time. We're not sure. And then time passes and they keep moving because it's not really their plan.
Right. So they know that it's going to happen. They just don't know the time or the day. And so they've always got a player on the field. But Ed speculates that when this person dies, they will be basically possessed. They'll be allowed to come back through some sort of like...
The scripture says that who can challenge the image of him? Like after he suffers this mortal head wound, he'll reappear and the people will say, who can challenge this image of him? And he takes the etymology of the word image and I think it was written in, it wasn't written in Hebrew. It might've been written in Greek at the time, but he thinks that image would translate to the word clone. And as far as technology goes, we're right there right now. And where we met on X, it's kind of jarring because the guy who owns that also owns Neuralink, which is kind of right in your face technology of if I wanted to implant thoughts or maybe a possible spirit into you to overtake your entire person, the technology is right there.
So interesting too, because I think people look at I'm still not sold on Musk. I still have some weird thoughts and ideas about him. And they're like, oh, free speech on X, Musk is great. And I'm like, what about Neuralink and the fact that this guy has like a dozen kids? Like it's kind of a bit strange to me.
He's just putting
that's
Neuralink
IVF
in all
stuff,
their
right?
heads.
Like Is he even having sex? Like, I don't even know. I think a lot of these are test tube babies.
He's got that Cybertruck body. He's doing it all through artificial insemination. But so this idea that
shout out to Starlink though. My internet's super clear. I just got
how about that? He's doing something right. So when it comes to this idea of like image meaning clone or replica or something of that nature, maybe there is a significance having to do with genetics, right? That's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, is like genetics seem incredibly significant. Well, what if the ability for let's say a spirit to possess you is increased exponentially if you have genetics that are in alignment with it? So what if you could go and find the resurrection chamber?
That's so interesting, because like even during the Black Plague, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. The Black Plague, most of the people that died had the same genetic marker. The people that lived had a different genetic marker, because it's a very interesting thing.
There's something very, very important about genetics, and I think it's even interesting that in modern day culture we've been told to sort of ignore that. Or at least if you're a certain people, you can be proud of your genetics. If you're not a certain people, you can't be proud of your genetics. But I think that there is something to genetics. And I think that a mixture of genes and technology is what these entities have been trying to achieve for all this time. It's the reason that they taught us metallurgy. It's the reason that they taught us agriculture. It's the reason that they've been pushing us in this direction, is so that we can get to the point where we can alter genetics, like I do believe we once did. I think that there is nothing new under the sun. I think a lot of this technology isn't being discovered for the first time. It's being rediscovered. And I think that a lot of it came to our understanding because of these spiritual influences. I think that the goal is there's a multitude going on. One of the things is, if you look at CERN, there seems to be an effort to bridge the gap between our realm and their realm. If they do exist in some sort of upside down, they can, I think it is their goal, to get humanity to a point where they're technologically advanced enough to bridge that gap. I think another thing that we can do is we can bring about a body that's suitable for these entities, right? Like maybe there is something about the overall constitution of a genetic being and whether or not it can house a spirit of a certain magnitude. So if you have the spirit of Nimrod, who was a Gibberim, through some process he became of the Nephilim. We don't really. I'm not really too sure.
Yeah, it actually mentions him like he became Gibberim, so he was a man and then became something extra.
The mighty men of old, men of renown. He became something augmented, and so being the first king of Babylon.
It's
and
also
everything.
very, very Nietzsche-esque as well. Like if you kind of look at like Nietzsche's idea of the Superman, Ubermensch,
Ubermensch, which even that I think has some really important bearings in today's world. But I think that the goal is to get humanity technologically advanced enough that we can help them come, because I think they are essentially trapped in this realm and awaiting judgment. But there will come a time where you'll see these things, according to the Bible, come out of the earth. The beasts of the earth will, roam the lands, and it's going to be, in my opinion, I think we're going to see, it's like when you see all these cryptids and everything, which, by the way, seem to happen mostly around military bases, which is very strange, especially if you consider like the Montauk project and things of that nature, which is what Stranger Things was modeled after. They're taking children, they're submitting them to trauma and abuse, and through that trauma and abuse, you could unlock alleged latent psychic abilities. This is the premise of Stranger Things, but that's also the conspiracy of what happened during the Montauk project. Yeah. And I think that it's not a coincidence that all these cryptids and such are seen around military bases. I think that a lot of these military bases are probably engaging, and it's compartmentalized. I don't think anybody who's coming and going from these places understands it, but I think on some level, on some subterranean floor, they are doing something of that nature, and they're bringing these things in. And I think there's going to be a time where we're going to see a lot more of them.
I think it's interesting too. Could you just imagine if we knew about all the terrible stuff our government was doing to like regular people, like you know what I mean? I think these things get kind of like dribbled out gradually, and they're like, oh, good thing we don't do that anymore. Like you hear about like some of these different experiments throughout history, and it's like, especially here in the U.S., and you just think that now we're so civilized and we don't do those things anymore. You know what I mean?
Well, we see this happening right now. And once again, people just compartmentalize it. It's the same way where you see elites looking for ancient artifacts and we go, they're just doing their thing. Don't worry about whatever they're doing. It's like, does our government seem to have some involvement in human trafficking? Well, certainly seems that way. Does our government have their hands in like child trafficking? Well, the Epstein case would suggest that it seems to be that way. And
I'd say the current administration, like just having a complete open door to unfettered immigration, well, no matter how you feel about it, that's a open window to child trafficking and whatever you want to do. Kids are just going
missing, dude. Kids are going missing.
They come showing up with like phone numbers written on them and stuff. It's just wild, man.
Right. So that is what we're willing to talk about. But what we're not willing to talk about is, the SRA aspect, satanic ritual abuse. It's like, why do so many of these? There's people out there with testimonies that would shake you to the core. And so often it's like, well, my grandfather was a high-ranking military individual. He was military intelligence.
Even, you guys probably don't know this, but Jim Morrison from The Doors, his father was the captain in the Gulf of Tonkin. Like, how wild is that?
It happens constantly. And
Jack
there seems
Black's
to be
mother was like
Jack Black's mother.
Yeah, in NASA. I mean, all these people.
Yeah.
All these people are...
There's always some sort of strange thread, but nobody's willing to, or people are willing to, but it's a very uncomfortable topic. It's human trafficking and child trafficking is bad enough. What about this satanic ritual element? And it's like, well, why do we have over and over again, you're trafficking children? There seems to be a military aspect. There seems to be a satanic aspect. And that's really jarring for people. Why these two things go together? When you think of military, you think of like none of that nonsense. Everything is just, hardware and manpower. But somehow there's a ritual aspect. Somehow there's an entity-driven aspect. Sometimes, what are they doing?
The ritual's right in our face, right? I mean, there's Planned Parenthoods everywhere. There's millions of babies being aborted and killed every year in America. This is blood sacrifice. It's
become like a creepy religious thing. Like the woman that had the shirt, like I've had X number of abortions. Like it's kind of like I'm sure like people get in hard up situations and they're trying to figure out how to handle the situation. And maybe that's an option they chose. But for other people where it's like a thing they're promoting and they're proud of, I don't quite understand that. It doesn't compute for me.
Well, that's the thing. So our society now, because it's outright worship of this. And if you look at the god behind it, the one that always demands the child sacrifice, it's Moloch. He's like the effigy of a bull, and it's like, hand over your baby to me. But that also calls back to the idea of the Nephilim, where you had to make this sacrifice in order for them to leave your village alone, for you to continue to live in somewhat peace until he comes back the next year or next month, and you have to offer that baby to him again. But yeah, we just do it outright. So you got to ask yourself whether it's some hard times because of financial issues and you had to abort this baby. You still have to come to terms with like, okay, I am performing some type of child sacrifice here. Yeah. There's a baby being killed, whether I like it or not. They're going to pull it out of me piece by piece with some tongs. They're going to poison it with a needle first and then discard the pieces. And God only knows what they do with that because,
what do they do with it? We saw cases not long ago where it was just employees. It was individuals, not representative of Planned Parenthood. These are just individuals that we employ, and it's got nothing to do with us. It's very unfortunate that it happened. But yeah, they were selling baby parts on the black market.
Yeah, and that's like light stuff. Like, that's fine. I think more about the big picture of, well, what happens in like, I don't know, if you go to like the Civil War sites, right? Gettysburg, people like, it's haunted, has a very downtrodden feeling. You can feel the heaviness because a lot of blood has been spilled on this land. And the Bible does mention that, like, don't spill blood on the land, especially in the desert, because you can open up some weird portals there or do some strange stuff to the land. You can alter it permanently by spilling blood. Well, what happens in America when you spill the blood of 1 million innocent babies? And then, like, right now, we all look around, like, I think all of us could say about the state of America, like, well, look at this place. It's a joke. It's a clown world. Everything's upside down. Everything is pretty satanic on its face and awful. Not a place I want to raise kids in. Do you think that millions of babies being sacrificed a year on this land, it's a blood sacrifice? Do you think that has anything to do with this? No.
I would say that, the particular theme of children best exemplifies the damage that has been done by this sort of an ideology, because when you look at what we're willing to accept now that we weren't willing to accept in the 90s, in the 90s when it came
Like,
to exposing children to certain things.
Well, popular culture, man. You look at how fast things have shifted. Like things that were a joke and that were funny and that everybody didn't find acceptable in the 90s, like they're dead serious about now. It's kind of scary, man.
Yeah, and I think that to your point about Jim Morrison, I don't believe that there has been such thing as an organic culture. Definitely not in our lifetime. I don't know for how long, hundreds of years. I think that what happens is anything that has grassroots that is viable will immediately be co-opted by the intelligence agencies. And I mean, you see this with
well, you can even look at like the drug problems a lot of these stars have and whatever. Like, you know, did they give themselves that problem, or is that problem given to them? I think that's something to consider.
Kanye West's handler, I think that's a good, a good example of what they're willing to do. They're texting him, telling him that if he continues on his, antics, that they're going to drug him into oblivion and he'll never see his kids again. I think that a lot of Hollywood people are being, and there is a consent aspect too that they're willing to engage in, but I think they're being taken advantage of. But as far as like the culture, you just look at where things have moved so rapidly in the past 15 years. And I would say like it's completely inorganic. The LGBTQ movement was immediately co-opted and weaponized. The feminism movement was co-opted and weaponized. And we've just hit this, I think, the pace. I think it used to take a long time to engineer culture. I think with social media, it can happen pretty rapidly now. Now it happens, you could probably engineer some real culturally impactful, significant moments in days.
Even as ridiculous as it is, I know this story that came out of Springfield. I don't know where you guys are on that. I think it's all BS because to me it feels like the one about them like eating cats and ducks and stuff like that.
Right,
I'm like it came up so fast and it was suddenly everywhere that I'm like, something about this isn't right. Like I feel like that's how a lot of our culture like feels like it pops up now.
I feel like with the Springfield thing, it's like, go ahead, Tom.
That might be like a psyop, the whole cat eating thing. It's a very fun meme, but let's also not overlook that it's a fact, the average IQ of a Haitian person is 67. And we're just importing them into our society, which again, let's talk about diversity. Let's talk about genetics. Why is diversity our strength all of a sudden, but the elites are breeding themselves into mental retardation to keep a certain bloodline?
That's true. Yeah, if you look at the Rothschilds and everything, I mean, they're literally gangly horror shows. They're hideous.
Why are Orthodox Jews doing the same thing? They don't go outside of their line. They keep it all inside. Well, I'm not saying that we should, but I'm saying we should ask why. And at the same time, you're importing people from a third world country into a country like ours, not compatible with anything we're doing, not smart enough to be meaningfully integrated into society. And this is not all of them, but if this is the average, this is most. And I will say, if you're coming from a place where the best you could do was mud huts, I worked in the MTA and I work with people from Trinidad, Tobago, Haiti, all these third world countries. They were my supervisors. They had no business telling me what to do. I told one of them at one point, like, you came 3 years ago from a mud hut. I could have taken your job, but I don't want the responsibility of working with these other people who came from mud huts. So
you told me these people with the MTA, you told me they couldn't read a tape measure.
They couldn't read a tape measure. They're like, it's 3 and 5 sticks. I'm like, do you mean like 3 and a quarter?
That, man. Like I'm here in Northwest New Jersey, and I went to the bank the other day, and there's this little white girl working there, and she didn't know how to count the money since the machine was broken that counts the money. So she was trying to find somebody to count the money for her. I'm like, it's like $100. Can you just like count it? Like,
it's degradation across all aspects. It's they're trying to do
maybe it's not just the immigration.
I don't think it's just immigration. I think as a whole, we're getting stupid, man.
Oh yeah, that's a
but
fact.
Do we need? I think a good question is, do we need more stupid? Like Joey Diaz said it best. He's like, listen, cocksucker, maybe America's full. And America does seem like it's pretty full at this point. Like, we can't handle what we have going on. You need to stop bringing people in.
And look, we were bringing them in under their false pretenses. It was the idea that they were mothers and children, right? They were sad. They were getting separated at the border. And all of a sudden, the border laws become much more porous. And suddenly, what are we getting? We're getting military-aged men. I think what we're actually watching is the purposeful orchestration of like the downfall of the West. We talked about on the episode.
I feel like that's a whole other podcast episode. I think we did on yours actually. So it's kind of interesting, man.
But I think a lot of it is the purposeful implosion, and I think it's almost like they looked at what worked at making previous empires fall. Well, let's do that here. And I think the extreme polarization and decadence to poverty is one of the things that really exemplifies that, or the lack of cultural cohesion. That's the other problem too. It's like, in America, there's an experiment going on. It's the melting pot, right? And the idea is like, can you have all these different cultures and ethnicities come together and live in unison under these values? And one of the things that we've done is we've just gotten rid of the values. We don't know what American values are anymore. They used to be pretty clear cut. Now they don't really exist anymore. Well, what about the cultural cohesion? Well, there is none, because you can come here and you can go to a community that's homogenized, and you can actually never learn to speak the language. You can never learn to, indulge in the culture. What even is American culture anymore? We don't know. So when it comes to the fabric of American society, I think that it's full of holes. And the problem when it's full of holes, because there's no cohesion from one group to the next. I don't know my neighbors. A lot of them don't speak English, whatever the case may be. And you're pouring more and more people like that into the country by the day. When there are holes in the cultural fabric, people who would seek to rip it apart, they just stick their fingers in the holes. Yeah. So that's where you start to leverage one culture against another. That's when you start to manufacture race wars, right? If you look at the media constantly, it's like everything is about race. It's like the hot button issue. Everything is racist and about race. Meanwhile, they're importing as many different races as they possibly can. So they're magnifying the problem, and then they're giving more instances of the problem, and they're doing it on purpose. It's to basically cause what I imagine we're moving towards. And I don't want to be a black pill on it, but it just looks like they're trying to manufacture a sort of racial civil war.
And while all this is happening, there's a backdrop of child sacrifice happening at a very high level. And then there's also...
Thanks for bringing us back on topic there, Tom.
Yeah, there's also another backdrop of, by the way, there's aliens and they're doing some kind of genetic manipulation. And it's our contention that the aliens are Nephilim. They're not anything else. They're demonic entities that will come to you. Actually, David had a story. I don't know if we have enough time for it, but how like these alien entities, demonic entities, sleep paralysis entities are kind of all the same beings. They present themselves differently, but their tactics are exactly the same.
Yeah. So, okay.
How about this? Because we're closing on like almost an hour and a half. How about we do another future episode on that? I think
that's cool.
I want to do it. I want to do that story justice, and I definitely want to bring you guys back because I'm like totally enthralled. So I guess just final thoughts on kind of what we talked about today, and we'll kind of bring everybody in for a landing.
I think that if you're paying attention now, it's going to become more and more glaringly obvious that we're supposed to be a culture that separates, let's say church and state. And we're supposed to be a culture who's lost their way spiritually. We don't believe in spirituality more. But if that's true, then why are the signs and symbols of spiritual entities everywhere? Why is everything that's supposed to promote shock value inherently satanic or Luciferian? Even if you go back to the ceremonies for the Olympics, it was, people said, oh, well, it was Dionysus and it had nothing to do with the Last Supper. I think both. To me, it's a why not both type of situation. They seemingly did mock the Last Supper with the shot that they developed, but also just because it is Dionysus and just because the Olympics have always been inherently Greek does not mean that is a good thing, because if these entities are real, we are venerating them. In April, this past April, before the Olympics, they did an entire ceremony. I don't know if you saw this, Jeremy, they did a big homage to Zeus. And it's my contention, it's something that I've been working out lately. I believe that Zeus is the Babylonian god Hadad or Baal. Baal was also described as being the king of storms, and I think that his legacy or his veneration is still happening on a large scale. One of the things that I've been working on is, Hitler and his association with Zeus. Because a lot of people say that Hitler was a Christian or a Catholic. And it's like, well, he's doing speeches
it's
from
really into occult stuff, though. If people if people that make that statement really don't don't understand his background at all.
Well, it's because we've been lied to about the Weimar Republic and the Bolshevik Revolution, and
Weimar Republic. You want to talk about some things that are similar to what we're living now. But anyway,
yes, but in that way, because we've been lied to about that, and that's coming to the general public's awareness lately, we go, well, if this is true and we've been lied to, then the exact opposite of what has been told to us must be the truth. And I wouldn't go that far, because then all of a sudden you start to paint Hitler as like a Christian or a Catholic and all these different things. And clearly there's a ton of Zeus. There's no Christian iconography, no Catholic iconography, but there is a lot of Greek iconography. We talked about in the episode we did, certainly their architecture was Greek in nature, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, there's fallen angel veneration, because you even described to us these cultures bleed over one into the other, and you sort of take them. That's why if you look at American politics, there's a lot of Greek architecture and such. But I would go even further and say, when you're giving speeches on the Zeppelin Tribune and you're doing it from something that was modeled after the Temple of Zeus, which is found in ancient Turkey, which is where Pergamum was, and in the Bible it says Pergamum is where the throne of Satan is, you may very well be doing speeches from the throne of Satan. And if you look at the iconography that's surrounding Hitler, you're not finding Christian iconography. You are finding the eagle, which was the animal most associated with Zeus, right? Because it's what he tended to transmute.
And when they're using the eagle, they're using the eagle because they're pulling it from Rome, and Rome was pulling it from even kind of older things. So it's kind of interesting how these things interconnect.
Right, and then you also have the thunderbolts or the lightning bolts, which if you look back at Baal and Hadad, they're pictured as holding the same thing, this like small staff with 3 prongs on either side. These entities seem to bleed over one into another, but I think that Zeus might have been one of the central figures. Like if there was a hierarchy of fallen that were cast down to Mount Hermon, I think he's in the top 9, let's say. And I think that when you look around at modern day symbolism, you will find the relics of all these entities still being venerated, still being pushed, and I would argue they're still in control. It just takes somebody who's willing to stop and ask why, because a lot of the times we don't do that. And if we do ask why, we give like a shit answer. It's like, well, why is this in the music videos? Shock value.
And I guess one side note before we let Top bring us home, Zeus, by the way, is a mistranslation, the word that people use. It likely would have been Zedeus, Deus just meaning God. So it's actually what we use is a mistranslation, I think, which kind of plays in more to even what you're talking about here. But anyway,
that's interesting. I didn't know that. That is interesting.
Yeah, it could be purposefully done.
So Top, bring us home, man.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, it's always kind of like a misdirection. They want your worship, adoration, or they want your fear. So, things like 2020 would have, and 9/11 would have been huge fear campaigns, which I think that they lose off of. They live off of that, or they live off of your worship or the sacrifices that you give to them. So, when they're deprived of that, I think things get a lot better. But it just seems like this world is on a downward spiral into madness because of the veneration, because of the worship, because of the fear that we're constantly given these things. So, I don't know if I could tell people one thing before I leave is like, hey, stop taking part in this stuff. It's not so bad. It's not going to be so bad. Things can get better. Stop worshiping fallen entities.
Very cool. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. For those of you out there listening, as I said, we're trying to get back into exploring some subjects that aren't looked at. We don't always believe everything we're talking about here, but at the same time, I think it's really interesting to explore it and take a look at it and kind of open our mind to what's out there in the world, so we kind of understand our broader subjects and topics a bit more. And we kind of got away from that as we got way into red team, blue team over the last year. So we're trying to have more conversations like this. We're definitely going to have these guys back because now they have another story we got to explore in here. So for those of you out there listening, don't forget to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash that subscribe button if you support liberty, freedom, and want to build a better future. Thanks again for being with us today, guys. And for everybody out there, thanks again for watching.